A young girl with dark hair and big surprised amber eyes was sitting on a bed, surrounded by a small group of people. A tired-looking man who seemed to be a doctor sighed deeply and said that she had lost her memory. The girl didn't know that these people were gathering around her and that this place looked nothing like Korea, so fear mixed with genuine confusion grew inside her. Suddenly, the last thing she remembered before finding herself there crashed into her head. Then, unsuspecting, she crossed the street looking at the screen of her smartphone and not noticing anything around her. Suddenly, the roar of an engine was heard. The headlights of a truck blinded her before she felt a powerful impact, and then the world went dark. However, now her body was completely fine, which meant that because she was hit by a truck, she was reborn in another world. It seemed that now she would have to live in this place. On the street, she was greeted by the cheerful laughter of the maids. The girl walked past them calmly, proudly, and alone. One of the maids was holding a basket full of washed clothes when suddenly a strong wind blew, quickly lifting the cloth and threw one of the handkerchiefs directly into the girl's face. Noticing this, the maids immediately stopped laughing and looked at her in horror, as if waiting for a verdict. They hurried to bow and apologize. Trembling with fear, the girl took the handkerchief off her face, smiled brightly, and gently calmed the frightened maids. They looked at each other confused, turning to her. They almost with tears expressed their surprise that their lady treated them with such respect and asked her to behave in a way that made her feel comfortable. Ignoring their pleas and focusing only on the name that was now hers, she wondered why his name sounded so familiar. Finally remembering, she shouted in surprise, further frightening the maids. She, whose full name was Laela Rand McKenna, was one of the characters from Love Blooms in the Desert of Romfant, despite the simple plot. The girl really enjoyed reading this book due to the incredible writing of the author, and now she had entered the body of the character in this book. Now everything clicked, and it became clear why the maids were so scared of her. She had always been cruel and ruthless to those she didn't like, so it was no surprise that no one wanted her. Even her parents weren't particularly interested in her in the book. Laela Rand McKenna was definitely the villain, a vain character who thought she would naturally become queen. But when the king fell in love with the main character, Laela immediately began to pursue her and even tried to poison her to make her disappear once and for all. The girl sighed and said out loud that whatever the case, Laela wasn't such a terrible villain. The maids looked at each other, puzzled, wondering if their lady was really okay, especially since she was soon to be married. Intrigued, she approached them and asked what kind of wedding they were talking about. They explained fearfully that in 3 days she must marry the second prince of the Ren Empire. Stunned by this news, she screamed, not understanding how she could suddenly become a married woman. In the book, the Ren Empire was mentioned when the war began, but the state wasn't particularly noteworthy and eventually failed and collapsed due to this country's situation, so she had to get hitched, even though the second prince was like a total nobody in the book. He wasn't going to be king or anything, so standing at the altar, she was totally bugging out, wondering if marrying him this fast was a huge mistake. It was in the middle of the night, and there were 0 guests, like even the emperor bailed on his own son's wedding. She was side-eyeing the prince, totally stressing about whether he was ugly AF since he was hiding his face. Like, even though it was a forced marriage, she was really hoping the prince would at least be hot. The princess gets taken to her new room, and she's actually vibing with it, saying how nice the decor is when a smiling maid named Laurie shows up. Laurie said she'd get her bed ready, but the princess was like, "Nah, I got it," and said she'd just do everything herself. 'Cause she felt bad for the maids who were used to getting treated like trash, she started wondering where that guy was now. It was seriously messed up to just ditch your new wife on the wedding night. Guess he wasn't into this marriage either. She asked Laurie when the prince was gonna show up, and Laurie totally flinched, hesitating because she didn't want to spill the tea. The girl was like, "Whoa, what's up?" And after psyching herself up, Laurie finally said the prince might not show up at all. Elle was so shook she literally dropped to her knees, looking all emo, because she couldn't believe he ghosted her right away. Right after getting married too. The freaked out maid rushes to help her up, and the girl just sadly thinks that maybe this is for the best. It's a total drag living with someone you don't vibe with, so it'd be better if they just never even met until she died. But when the prince still hadn't shown up after a whole month, she was so annoyed and was like, okay, this is just extra. She turned to Laurie and finally asked the question that had been bugging her for a long time. Just how ugly is the prince? The maid looked shocked and didn't know what to say. The princess said she was ready for anything, but being ugly was a major turnoff, so it was super important for her to get an answer to her question. Laurie looked all awkward and asked if the princess hadn't heard any of the gossip about him, and she admitted that while she's never seen him in person, she's heard rumors that during the day the prince turns into a monster. Picturing this huge mouth with fangs, she totally recoiled, horrified that her husband was a legit monster. Laurie kept going, saying that the word on the street is, when the prince was a kid, some evil wizard cursed him, which is why he always hides from everyone during the day. And then it all clicked. That's why the prince rushed into marrying her, she thought to herself, and was super ticked off, how could they marry off their daughter who has amnesia to a guy who's cursed to turn into a monster? Later that night, the princess just woke up out of nowhere. Moonlight was flooding her room, but it was still way too early to get up. She sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes all tired, and just stared out the window for a bit, checking out the night view. Then it hit her that it's been a whole month since she got zapped into this book, which meant she really did die after all. Thinking about that, she got all emotional and clutched her blanket, wondering if she'd ever get back home before quietly slipping out of her room. She threw on a shawl, still not really getting what happened to her, but decided she needed to figure this place out like ASAP. As she was walking through the moonlit garden that night, the girl suddenly realized she'd gone. Way off in the distance, her eyes locked onto this totally gorgeous body of water that was lapping up against these huge, smooth rocks. She couldn't help but wonder if, like for real, this was still the Imperial Palace. There were 0 guards around, just this one lonely fluffy dog, just chilling peacefully by the roots of a tree. When she spotted it, she gasped, which totally spooked the dog, and it immediately woke up from its nap. It flashed its teeth at her all mad and let out this low-key warning growl. Realizing it was just a dog, she let out a sigh of relief. Still, something about the dog's vibe was kinda sus. Even though it growled all threatening, it didn't seem like it was actually gonna lunge and bite her. The girl started talking to it, all nice, telling it she wasn't gonna touch it. Hearing that, the dog instantly chilled out and went back to flopping down in its spot, lazily closing its eyes. Seeing the dog so chill was actually super relaxing. But with that whole special vibe going on, the princess suddenly felt super drowsy. She woke up when the sun was already way up in the sky. A voice kept calling her name, yanking her out of her sweet dreams. Barely able to open her eyes, she was totally confused to find Laurie bawling and a bunch of nervous soldiers standing around her. When Laurie saw the princess was finally awake, she ran over, crying her eyes out and going on about how she'd totally been attacked. So sure of herself, she screamed all dramatically, "Who would dare do this?" And the soldiers totally ran with it and asked her to point out the non-existent attacker. She tried to explain what happened, but they wouldn't let her get a word in and just kept insisting she was attacked. Not able to take it anymore, she, burning with cringe, yelled that she just fell asleep. It got super awkward. Laurie politely thanked the soldiers for their help, while the princess was practically dying of embarrassment. She speed-walked back to the palace, and the maid, who could barely keep up, ran after her, whining about how scared she was because she thought something bad had happened to the princess, and that the whole castle was in a panic because she was missing. She stopped dead in her tracks and asked if anyone in the palace owned a dog. Laurie shook her head, looking all surprised. This got the girl wondering what kind of dog she'd even met then. That night, the princess couldn't get back to sleep. She went back out to the garden, kinda laughing to herself that she was looking for that dog, because she had nothing better to do. It was so weird that Laurie said she'd never seen any dogs around here, and she wondered if maybe it was a dog from another palace. Her feet basically took her right back to the same pond from last night, and there on the shore, she suddenly saw someone's silhouette. Startled, she asked the stranger who they were, and they slowly turned to look at her. She realized it was her husband. The guy just stood there in this moody silence. The girl thought to herself that she didn't even know his name. She tried talking to him again, but he just ghosted, rushing off without listening. She just stared after him, totally confused, wondering what that was all about. The next day, the princess was still stuck on why her husband just bounced so fast the second he saw her. She sighed and figured that maybe he was just used to dipping on people because of the whole curse thing where he turns into a monster during the day. But whatever, she couldn't care less about her husband. Then, her eyes popped open when she spotted something familiar chilling in the shade of these massive trees. A super fluffy snow-white dog was totally passed out snoring. She immediately crouched down in front of it, just vibing and staring at the little guy. Her amber eyes were literally sparkling. Giving in to the impulse, she reached out to pet its shiny fur. The dog, feeling something move, suddenly snapped its eyes open. The girl instantly jumped back with a shriek. She stared, totally freaked out at the beast. She woke up. It let out this deep growl from its throat, just like last time. She was like, "My bad." Her voice kinda guilty, "I won't touch you." Then all of a sudden, she heard Larry yelling from behind her. The dog peeked out from behind her, looking all happy at the maid, like zero threat at all. Larry was shook, like, "Whoa, you were right, my lady, there really is a dog here." So she's like, "How did it even get here?" The maid was like, "Maybe it's Mr. Schwartz's dog." And she was all, "Huh." Larry got all awkward and was like, "Schwartz is the prince's name." She just gave a total meh reaction to that news. She offered to take the dog back to the castle. I mean, you can't just leave it on the street, especially since this little pup was all by itself. There was nobody around, and it was giving her major flashbacks to her own situation. Later, while she was giving the dog a good scrub in the bath, she came up with a nickname for him, Tofu. She cooed at Tofu, asking him if he liked his new name. She was all gentle, like, "If you want to live in the palace, you gotta get cleaned up." The girl was having the time of her life, smiling like crazy. She asks the pup if she should hop in with him and starts taking off her clothes. She carefully slipped the sleeve of her dress down her skinny shoulder. The dog suddenly freaked. To the girl's total shock, it bolted out of the bath like a rocket, ran to the door, and started scratching it like a maniac, making it super obvious it wanted out right now. She was so confused and ran over to the little troublemaker. Hearing the loud scratching, Laurie, ready to go into full-on bodyguard mode for her lady, Laurie burst in, and the dog used its chance to zip right out of the room. Laurie spotted some movement to her left and whipped her head around, totally lost. The girl's whole vibe was just crushed. Her face got all serious while she carefully dried Tofu with a fluffy towel. She asked him gently, "What was that all about? Why'd you suddenly lose your chill like that?" She figured maybe the dog just wasn't a fan of baths. Then bam, the girl lets out this huge sneeze. A worried Larry is like, "Did you catch a cold?" She just waves it off like it's no big deal. but then immediately lets out another crazy loud sneeze. Laurie was not playing and made her get in bed. Lying there, she thought about how much it sucks here. You know, 'cause of the whole no modern hospitals thing. Suddenly she hears Tofu's little bark somewhere nearby. The dog gave her this sad puppy dog look and whimpered. The princess tried to chill him out, telling him it wasn't his fault she got sick. She patted the spot on the bed right next to her, basically inviting Tofu to come sleep with her. He happily hopped up and landed right on top of her. They passed out cuddling. The last thing the girl thought before she drifted off was how she low-key loved feeling the warmth of another living thing next to her. Just as the first rays of morning sun started creeping into the room through the window, she kinda sleepily opened her eyes. Something weird was coming into focus in her blurry vision. Then bam, her eyes were wide open. And she saw this super hot blonde dude just passed out peacefully right next to her. Her eyes practically bugged out of her head. She just froze for a couple of seconds, and then it slowly hit her. Some random half-naked guy was sleeping in her bed, and she had zero clue who he was or how he even got there. Just then, he started to wake up too. He slowly opened his eyes, and as his gaze shifted, he locked eyes with the totally shocked girl. The guy was completely stunned, and you could totally see the panic in his eyes. Snapping out of it, he immediately jumped out of bed. The rando just bolted, completely ignoring her yelling at him, only thinking about how to dip out of there ASAP. The girl's mind was totally blank after a morning like that. But then came this ear-splitting scream about some creep. She was walking in the garden with Tofu when a super worked-up Laurie ran up to her. She asked, all worried about the whole thing with the creep that morning. But the princess just told her maid that everything was cool. She was worried, though, about how bad the security was around here and was like, what's the deal? I mean, this is an empire for real. There's no way they don't have enough cash. She asked Laurie, who was in charge of the palace's budget. She gently pet Tofu's head and listened to the maid say that the chamberlain was probably the guy who handled all that. She'd never even seen this chamberlain dude before, and the maid quickly tried to explain. The thing was, Laurie hadn't been there that long, so she couldn't give a straight answer. And honestly, before her arrival, the servants were having a pretty rough time. She gave a skeptical smile and asked if Laurie ever thought she'd get into it with the chamberlain. And Laurie got all nervous and was like she never thought Hella was a bad person. The princess told her there was no need to freak out. She just wanted to meet the chamberlain. Suddenly, Tofu started whining and she got worried and asked what was wrong. She asked him if he was really that bent out of shape about the chamberlain. She just stared at the dog, not getting what his deal was. The girl kept throwing out ideas for why Tofu might be upset, but he just stayed quiet, staring her down. There was one last possibility. When she mentioned the creep, the dog barked like, heck yeah! She was super surprised, looking at Tofu, totally confused. She said it again, and the dog let out this low-key, threatening growl. His whole vibe just screamed that he was ready to protect her no matter what. The girl couldn't help it, and just hugged Tofu, totally melting from all the love from her dog. Her warm, fuzzy moment was cut short by the thought that the chamberlain probably wasn't even that busy, and that she needed to find him and have a chat. A few days later, the chamberlain was just chillin' sipping tea with his servants. She rolled up with Laurie to talk, but some serious-looking young servant blocked her way, saying she couldn't go in right now. She just smirked and said he should know exactly who she is. The servants looked at each other, all nervous. Channeling her inner Hella from the book, the girl crossed her arms annoyed and snapped, asking if she really needed to spell out who she was. They bowed their heads all respectfully to the princess, and she demanded they let her through. Tofu barked angrily, backing his girl up. The servant was talking mad smack to the dog, and she was so not having it she just straight up decked him. The other servant, Laurie and Tofu, who totally didn't see that coming, just stared completely shook. Not even believing what they were seeing, the girl, who was totally livid, ignored them and started chewing the servant out for dissing her dog. While the other servant helped the dude who just got owned get to his feet, the girl was just thinking to herself. She was thinking about how something like that would never fly back in Korea. Before this, when she was in the Sahad kingdom for a few days, all the maids there helped her out, but here Laurie had to do everything by herself. But whatever, Tofu was worth way more to her than all those servants. She was kinda surprised by her own thoughts, but then she looked down at the dog. As she was gently petting his head, she realized she couldn't help but catch feelings for this super cute guy. Then it totally hit her. Neither Laurie nor Tofu were in the OG book, and the fact that Laela was getting married to some rep from the Ren Empire was already way off script. Soon enough, the princess was taken to see the chamberlain. He made a totally grossed out face when he saw them. He turned to Laurie, all annoyed, reminding her that he was supposed to see the princess himself, to which she nervously replied that it had already been a few days. The guy wasn't buying it and totally lost his cool, starting to scream at the maid for having the nerve to talk back to him. His whole meltdown was cut short by her, who clapped back at the chamberlain real rude. The dude whipped around to look at her, stunned by the sheer audacity. The Laela from the book was a total savage who didn't care about anyone's feelings, so the girl, realizing the only way to put the chamberlain in his place was to channel the main character, just went for it. She balled up her fist, giving the man a death stare right in the eyes. To everyone's shock, she just straight up clocked him right in the face. The servants were freaking out over what the princess just did, their jaws on the floor. Laurie, though, was totally chill. She just carefully covered Tofu's eyes. Bright red blood started pouring from the Chamberlain's nose as he fell out of his chair with a loud thud. He was screaming his head off in pain and clutching his nose, but she just watched him suffer completely unbothered. The guy got up and yelled that he wasn't going to let this slide, but all he got back from the princess was a stone-cold glare. She basically told him he was a nobody, and coldly asked who he was going to go snitch to. She didn't give a damn if some noble was backing him up, or if he was going to run and tattle to the emperor and empress. Finally, the totally embarrassed Chamberlain, whose name was Kapari, grumpily agreed to negotiate. She asked totally deadpan if it was true that he was in charge of the palace budget. Before Kapari could even answer, the girl demanded he hand over the rights to her. The man was left completely stunned. I mean, the budget was supposed to be handled with the prince's okay, but since the prince could only deal with stuff at night, the Chamberlain was supposed to be in charge during the day, and she was not about to let that happen. The Chamberlain nervously asked her if she was any good at, crunching numbers. She just coldly answered his question with another question. Do women in the Empire not learn math or something? She then casually added that she was taught all that back in her kingdom. The salty dude told her to prove her skills ever since she was a little kid. He promised that if she could actually show she was legit, he'd give her the keys to the budget. But that wasn't even enough for her. Kapari was living it up in the sickest palace, so he demanded they trade spots if he won, cause he was so sure the girl wouldn't be able to handle the tough stuff. He smirked and said she'd have to really try hard. He started throwing easy-peasy math problems at her, and the girl, looking totally bored, just nailed all the answers. The Chamberlain was completely shook that she answered everything so easily. The girl, who was expecting something way harder, figured he was totally messing with her cause she could solve that stuff in her sleep. Slamming his fist on the table, Kapari freaked out, yelling that there was no way the princess could be that good at math, when suddenly he felt a sharp pain as Tofu latched onto his leg hard. He tried to shake the dog off, but totally failed, just howling in pain, and she just watched the whole thing totally satisfied. With his leg all wrapped up, the Chamberlain sat sulking on the bed, thinking super hard about how he could just hand over the power he'd been chasing for so long to some princess from another country. He remembered how after he lost, he declared that no matter what, he wasn't leaving the palace. But the girl was just like, if you don't mind living under the same roof, then you can stay, I guess. The dog growled, all protective of its owner. Kapari clenched his fist furiously, deciding he was going to make that mutt disappear for good. He orders the maid to basically spy on the princess 24/7. Meanwhile, she flops onto her new bed, so relieved, and a super happy Tofu jumps up right after her. The girl excitedly asks the dog if he likes the new room, and he totally barks yes. Now that the princess was out of that grimy palace, she felt like her bad vibes were totally gone. Larry was legit happy for her and gave her a warm smile. She noticed he got way happier after Tofu showed up. She yawns, super tired. She's feeling totally wiped today. Before she dozes off, she asks Larry not to bounce if he's suddenly told to leave her for some other palace, and he promises he'll protect both her and Tofu. The next day, she's sorting through reports in her new office, when the last one totally catches her eye. Kinda lost in thought, the girl asks Larry what exactly she's been eating this whole time. The maid lists off everything she ate. The princess shows her a report that says they spent a whopping 1 million gold pieces on food and 300,000 on property upkeep, and asks why the food is so ridiculously expensive and who's blowing all that cash on the property. Larry's like, Kapari was the one behind all this. She lets out a huge sigh, realizing there's some shady business going on. Suddenly, she hears some weird noises and looks over, all confused. Tofu instantly jumps up and lets out a threatening bark. Staring straight ahead, he bolts from his spot towards the door, and his owner runs right after him. When she gets out of the room, she sees him going after the scared maid, still growling like crazy. The poor girl looks genuinely terrified. The princess asked her with a serious edge if Kapari sent her to spy on her. The maid dipped her head and said her name was Lena, claiming she was just tidying up the main palace. But homegirl was not having it, asking her ice cold why she was there, and not in the salon, giving her a total death stare. The girl tells her to bounce and tells Kapari to quit playing stupid games, watching with a satisfied smirk. As Lena scurries away, she suddenly clocks Tofu's happy face, and her whole vibe just flips in a sec. She scoops him up in a happy hug, totally gassing him up for being so quick on his feet. She keeps going, all emotional, saying how cute and smart Tofu is, and then tries to give him a smooch, but the dog just shoves her with his paws. She's like, does he hate kisses or what? The next morning, the dog isn't next to her, and she starts to freak out. She starts looking for him. She never knew where he went at night, but he always rolled back at the same time in the morning. But today he totally ghosted. Laurie said she checked the whole hallway, but the dog was completely MIA. She was visibly tweaking, super worried about her favorite doggo being gone. Laurie tried to get her to chill out, suggesting he just went for a walk. But she was worried Kapari might have done something to him. Laurie was shook by the thought. She couldn't stop thinking about the way the Chamberlain was looking at him yesterday, even with all the clout Kapari has in the palace. He wouldn't dare throw shade at the princess, but that wouldn't work on a dog. I mean, in this world, dogs were treated like literal garbage. She wanted to roll up on Kapari right then and find out if Tofu was there. But if he wasn't, it would just make things 1,000 times worse. After getting her head straight, her eyes were basically on fire with rage. She told Laurie to go find the Chamberlain and tell him she wasn't interested in all his fancy pants aristocratic games, and that if anything happened to Tofu, he was going to be in deep. Then she asked if Laurie knew where she could find the prince. The maid said that not even the Chamberlain had a clue. She nervously explained that the nanny used to take care of the prince, but then she got framed and kicked out of the palace, and nobody heard anything about the prince after that. Before the prince was cursed, the nanny was the only one he was tight with. The princess was so confused and asked, "So what's the deal with the emperor?" Laurie answered sadly that the emperor couldn't care less about the second prince and had never even visited. It was getting super late, and the prince was about to turn human again, so she was dead set on finding him. But the imperial grounds were way bigger than she thought, and it was not going to be easy. She couldn't use the servants and maids, because they were all on Team Kapari. She only had like 3 or 4 people to help her find Tofu and the prince. But even they were starting to get totally wiped out. Finally, the girl just gave up and told the maids to head back. Laurie was shocked and asked, "But what about the prince and Tofu?" The princess just said it was a no-go, and that she'd just asked the duke for help. It was the middle of the night and she was busy writing a letter to the duke. Even though her parents married her off to a monster, it's not like they'd actually refused to help her. Suddenly, the door creaks open and a super hyped Laurie runs in, making the girl jump. She anxiously says that he's arrived. A letter personally penned by His Majesty the Emperor. The letter said the Empress wanted Laela to pull up to the palace ASAP, and the Emperor even sent his chamberlain and some knights to escort her. The letter didn't give any deets on why they wanted to see her, but she couldn't care less, and just gave this sly smile. This was a huge opportunity to ask the Emperor for a solid, and also to spill all the tea about what Kapari did, so she tells Laurie to let them know she's heading out tomorrow. The next morning, she wakes up to something wet and rough touching her cheek, and she groggily cracks open her eyes. A white fluffy blob comes into view, and suddenly she's wide awake. It's Tofu alive and well right there staring at her. She shoots up and runs to hug her missing dog, her eyes getting all misty as she goes on about how worried sick she was. Then she notices Tofu's paw is all messed up, and she screams for Laurie, totally bugging out. They patch up his wound together, trying super hard not to hurt the little guy. Laurie shouts all mad, "Kapari totally did it, no question!" She calmly replies that he wouldn't dare, but hearing the totally valid question of who else would have, she gets lost in her thoughts. She promises herself she's done holding back and playing nice. She needs to get way tougher and more savage. That's the only way she'll be able to protect her crew. She tells Laurie that the plan's a go, she's off to see the Emperor, so she asks her to get everything ready. She's not going to be just some duke's daughter from another country. She's going to show everyone she's a legit princess and get her rights back. Laurie, totally stoked, is all for it and happily suggests they start by picking out a dress. But despite the maid's super hyped speech, the princess is kinda meh about the whole thing. She asks Laurie again about the dress, totally surprised. But then the maid leads her into this huge fancy room, stuffed with a ton of sick dresses and crazy expensive jewelry, and Laurie's hype becomes totally contagious. The maid, grinning from ear to ear, shows her the jewelry that Laela used to be obsessed with, from before she lost her memory. The light from the rainbow of gems is so bright it almost blinds her, and she has to shield her eyes from the crazy sparkle. She remembers how in the book, Laela was all about that bougie life, but she herself just didn't get the big deal, and just wore whatever she wanted. Laurie got so extra she was almost scary in her own way, looming over her all creepily while promising to give her the perfect glow-up for the trip. Not used to being this extra, she was already changed, just standing there awkwardly in a fancy blue dress, and with these massive gold earrings hanging from her ears. Seeing her, Laurie got even more pumped, and Tofu's face was a look of total shock, and the maid, laughing, suggested he was crushing hard. She, picking up on Laurie's vibe, asked the dog with a grin if he was really catching feelings. Laurie claimed that both human dudes and guy animals were all the same, and she asked, surprised, "Wait, Tofu's a boy?" The maid offered to check, but the dog got into a fighting stance, and then bounced into the wardrobe. He was looking at them all sad from under the slightly open doors, and the girls were saying how crazy it was that he really seemed like a person sometimes. After a bit, they went down to the garden, where her carriage was already waiting. Some super regal dude greeted the princess, introducing himself as the Imperial Chamberlain Sudan. She thanked him for rolling out to escort her, and the Chamberlain offered his hand, helping her up into the carriage. All of a sudden, Tofu just bolted at them, barking his head off, and one of the knights pulled his sword to try and scare him off, but the princess totally lost it and screamed at him. She was so mad she ordered him to drop the sword and was like, "That's my dog, I raised him." Then she turned to Yudin and was all, "He's coming with me." The carriage started rolling and she just shut her eyes, totally exhausted, and took a deep breath. Then she gave Tofu a serious look and was like, "Dude, that was so dangerous. You're already covered in bruises. And what if you got hurt again?" The doggo totally drooped his ears, looking guilty. She asked him, "Are you scared I'm gonna leave you or something?" And he barked like, "Yeah, duh!" Laurie just let out a little laugh. She said he was stuck to her like glue, and whenever the maid tried to pet him, he wasn't chill like he was with her. Pretty soon they pulled up to the palace. She got super nervous looking at it, trying to hype herself up for meeting the emperor. The chamberlain was like, "Follow me." Checking out the decor inside, the girl was just thinking how crazy expensive everything looked as she got closer to one of the doors. Yudin knocked and announced the princess was here. She walked into this super fancy room where the emperor was just sitting all proper on a couch. He gave the girl who walked in a totally bored look. She did a polite curtsy, greeting the emperor, who then motioned for her to sit across from him. And she super awkwardly walked over to the couch. You could tell she was totally uncomfortable around this quiet dude. He was giving off zero vibes. Just when she was about to die from the awkwardness, the emperor finally said something. He started off by saying she'd been married for a month now and asked if she was digging the palace, and the girl was like, for the most part. It's all good. Looking at her, he asked if she'd seen the second prince. The girl answered, kinda shyly, that she'd only seen him on their wedding day. Then the emperor asked if they'd seen each other since. Feeling like she was getting grilled, she kind of flinched and said no. She had to pick the right moment to bring up Kapari. The emperor went on saying he called her in today to give her something, and he slid a document in front of her. He told her it was proof that she had the authority to run things at the palace. She stared at the guy completely shocked as he kept talking, saying that even though the chamberlain tried really hard to do his job, she was taken over now. And since the second prince can't get his act together, she would have to step up and help. He said he'd also send extra knights and guards to the palace, then asked if she had anything to say, but Laela ditched her plan to tell the emperor about Kapari and just shook her head. She couldn't believe she got what she wanted that easily. Totally catching Yudin off guard, she asks who she could talk to about all the shady stuff going on. She awkwardly clarifies that it looks like a lot of rules were broken. Yudin promises that in that case, he'll let His Majesty know, and that he'll send someone to see her later. As she's leaving, the girl runs straight to Tofu, who is waiting for her like a good boy. She gives him a huge hug, totally ignoring everyone else around them right then. The emperor is watching them super closely through the window, and there's this seriously creepy look in his eyes. Back at the palace, Kapari is sipping on some wine, just enjoying being alone. He's pretty smug that after that whole thing, the princess has been quiet. A few days ago, this really nervous maid came into his bedroom and told him what the princess had said. That if anything happened to Tofu, he'd be in deep trouble. He was heated, thinking she was only this rebellious because she was from the Ren Empire. Now that she was freaked out about the dog, she wouldn't dare mess with him, and now all that was left was to figure out how to get his power back. Suddenly, a maid burst in, yelling that the princess was back from the imperial palace. Kapari, totally ticked off for being interrupted, so rudely arrogantly asked what the big deal was. But the maid just kept going, looking terrified. She said the princess had returned with the imperial knights. The chamberlain totally jumped, shocked by this news, and asked if the emperor himself had sent them. Biting his nails all nervously, he figured the knights were definitely here because the princess had called them. They were here to give the whole place a thorough shakedown. He was about to finesse enough cash to buy a fake noble certificate, and then just dip from this palace for good. He was so close to pulling it off. In a total fit of rage, he swiped everything off the table and screamed in despair. The wine bottle smashed against the wall, sending glass and blood-red splashes everywhere. The chamberlain was breathing hard, totally unable to contain the fire-like anger burning up inside him. After getting his thoughts straight, he decided to grab all the money and run. He figured a day like this might eventually come. That's why he kept a special ledger of which nobles he took bribes from, so he could easily squeeze them for cash with it. With a wild look in his eyes, he yanked open the drawer where the records were kept. His eyes flew wide open, and his whole body started to shake. There wasn't a single report inside. At that exact moment, the princess was out on the street talking with the knights. One of them assured the girl Lari that she'd be safe from now on. Lari thoughtfully suggested that it looked like Kapari had already found out the documents were missing. He asked her how she knew exactly where the records were stashed in such a huge palace, to which the princess replied that she just put herself in his shoes. If it were her, she wouldn't let something so valuable get too far away from her. Therefore, you just had to search a place like that and not even worry if finding it might look a little sus. As the sun set behind the horizon, making way for a silver moon in the sky, Tofu looked at his reflection on the clear surface of the water. His dog-like features quickly changed, taking on the appearance of a blonde man whose real name was Schwarzen. He was the emperor's favorite, and was about to become the crown prince, until this awful curse got him one day. On the day of the imperial banquet, a mage stormed into the palace. He yelled loudly, glowing with purple magic, that from now on the emperor would live his life as a stray dog. But Schwarzen leaped forward, shielding his father with his body. For a second, he was blinded by a bright flash of lightning and took the full force of the curse on himself, turning into a dog. The mage vanished, and his mother fainted from the shock. The emperor took out every noble who was at the banquet, and also sent every single mage in the country to the chopping block. But everyone found out about the incident, and rumors started spreading that the second prince had become a monster and disappeared. Shortly after, his mother died from an illness, and the emperor started to completely ignore his own son. Even the nanny was falsely accused and kicked out of the palace, and Schwartz couldn't go outside because he didn't want anyone to see him like that. At that moment, he thought it was better to have no one around at all. But then he met her, and he just had to be near her, so he was ready to protect her no matter what. So dude rolls up to his dad's palace all banged up and bleeding, totally ignoring some servant yelling at him to get patched up first, to get his wounds treated. He just busts open the door and gets hit with this ice-cold stare from the Emperor. The Emperor got all harsh asking why the prince even showed up. Schwartz explained that he came to ask for a favor, even if it seemed kinda rude. Getting on his knees in front of him, he asks him to protect his wife. Later, the reports he found were handed over to the Emperor, who was totally ticked off that the palace budget was being blown on personal stuff. All the nobles who were in on it either got their heads chopped off or demoted. And of course, Kopari was no exception. The Emperor thought this was awesome because he had a golden opportunity to get rid of these parasites. Still, he never thought Schwartz would ask him personally. The kid had everything it took to be the crown prince. Strategy guts and a smart vision. The first Prince Reinhardt is lacking all that stuff. If only it weren't for this stupid curse. He suddenly remembers her hugging the prince in his dog form, and a brilliant idea pops into his head. He shouted that he knew how to break Shrek's curse. The prince had to truly fall in love, but who's gonna fall in love with a dog? But wait, it's possible the princess could break the curse, even though she's the daughter of a duke from the state of Sahad, the one that tries to attack the empire every chance it gets. But this problem could be handled, so the Emperor calls for Ayudin and tells him he'll need to send a gift to the princess. She, having just finished going through the reports, stretched out so relieved. Worried about the girl, Laurie noticed she'd been grinding since early that morning. She put her hands on the table and let out a satisfied sigh, saying she was happy she managed to sort out the problems sooner than she thought. She kept going, saying it was all thanks to having Laurie and Tofu. That made the maid break into a happy smile, her eyes sparkling. Laurie announced that she had prepped a crazy delicious breakfast today. The princess was floored, totally amazed. The table was just overflowing with all kinds of delicacies, and her eyes were as wide as saucers. The pleased maid reported that even though the food costs had gotten way lower, the food was a lot more fancy now. Everyone was trying their hardest to impress the girl. It was all because she had that diamond necklace the Emperor gave her last time, which meant she was in his good graces. Suddenly, Laurie, thinking he might swap her out for another maid because of this, started making a fuss around her, assuring her that she was ready to be with her for the rest of her life. The girl smiled, saying happily that she and Tofu were enough for her. People who chase money and power are the type to just disappear like a mirage when everything's gone. Suddenly there was the sound of paws, and she turned around beaming. Tofu ran into her arms, and the girl, filled with genuine happiness, hugged the dog tenderly. She turned to the dog and asked if he would stay with her for a long, long time, and he barked a yes. Unable to contain her emotions, she squeezed him even tighter, admiring the dog's smiling face. Sometimes she really thought Tofu understood what she was saying. She decided to put his skills to the test. The princess is like paw, and the dog just slaps it right in her hand. Then she makes a finger gun and is like, bang. And the dog, being a total pro, just flops onto its back. When she tells it to roll over, it starts spinning all over the place, like a giant fluff ball. The girl is legit impressed and gives him a piece of meat as a reward. Then she asks if he wants to go for a walk, and Tofu just loses it, barking happily. Out on the street, they run into some maids sifting through a mountain of letters. She asks what's up with that. He replies that they are all invites to parties and does a major eye roll. It seems even the noble ladies who never gave her the time of day before heard she's tight with the Emperor now. But the girl is so not interested, so she ordered him to turn them all down. Having already walked a good ways away, Larry asks if she's going to keep rejecting the invites, and she gives him a firm yes. He goes on to say that, of course, it'd be smart to be friends with the nobles just to be ready for whatever. But for now, she didn't need that and was happy. But after this, the whole invite and reject cycle started happening every single day. The number of letters just kept growing and pour. Larry was practically drowning in a sea of paper, but the lady stood her ground, demanding a no every single time. When Larry visited her 4 days later, the princess was already completely over the constant invitations. But to the girl's massive relief, the maid wasn't there for that reason. He'd come to tell her about an invitation to a banquet, in honor of the second prince's birthday. She rubbed her temples, tired and annoyed, wondering irritably why they're throwing a party for the beast prince when they've literally never had one before, trying to figure out what the Emperor was playing at. She sat down to write a reply with a smirk, needing to make sure he wouldn't pull any more annoying stunts in the future. She hands the letter to Larry, telling him to send it to Shooting, at which point he notices her wicked grin and asks worriedly if everything's cool. With a terrifying look, she declares that, of course, everything is just fine, already thinking about how she's going to make it crystal clear why. Ela is considered the baddest woman in the entire kingdom of Sajad. Later, the girl met with Madame Naria, the imperial family's head designer, who showed up on her orders. He greeted her a bit awkwardly, saying that he trusted Naria to pick out her dresses. The princess's slick plan was to blow a ton of the Emperor's money so that nobody would ever want to invite her to a party like this again. Madame Naria opens up catalogs with the hottest dresses of the season, but honestly, nothing they showed her was a vibe. Finally, after checking out all the options, she let out a tired sigh and asked the woman what style would actually look good on her. With a super smooth move, she adjusted her glasses, her eyes twinkling, and declared that brighter colors, not pastels, would look totally fire on her. She suggested raising the waistline a little and going with pleated sleeves instead of lace. After thinking it over for a second, the princess agrees. The girl tells Madame Naria to swing by her place with sketches, and to get an outfit ready for the dog. The woman, thinking she totally misheard, asks again, completely shocked. The princess just shrugs and says that Tofu is going to the party with her too. Neria, looking totally bummed, exclaims that she can't put her designs on dogs. Hearing this, Tofu hangs his head sadly. Scooping the dog into her arms, the princess declares that in that case she can't cooperate. Madame Neria was not about to agree to such conditions, so she was totally unwilling to accept. He gave a respectful bow and bounced. She got super annoyed and told Laurie to find another designer to make clothes for the dog. But after thinking it over, she said it'd probably be a huge pain, since everyone basically hates the princess's dogs. Completely over this world, she just gave Tofu a sad hug, wondering how anyone could not love this sweet good boy, cause he was so loyal, like no one could even compare. The next day, Madame Neria comes back, with the tea that she changed her mind, and will totally stitch up some clothes for the dog. When asked why the sudden change of heart, the woman said it was an order from the emperor. He asks again, totally confused, not getting why his majesty would even need this. She looks at Tofu, surprised. And with a huge sigh, Madame Neria just cut to the chase, announcing that since they still had 3 months till the banquet, she'd have time to whip up about 4 dresses. The girl was down with the chosen design, and told the woman to make sure the fabric was like top tier, and to get 10 whole outfits ready, including clothes for the dog. Madame Neria, totally ticked off, said she has other clients, so her schedule is slammed. He stood his ground and promised to pay 5 times more if she'd just rearrange her schedule, but Neria replied that she has a super tight relationship with her clients and couldn't just do them dirty like that. The girl upped the ante and said in that case, she'll pay 10 times more, but the woman was still hesitating. Finally, he threw out a number 15 times bigger and offered to lock her in as the permanent designer. Caving to all that pressure, the woman finally agreed. The princess's face lit up instantly and she was just beaming, saying the imperial family would foot the bill. In her head, she was already calculating the damage and was planning on picking out some bling for herself. And that would probably be enough to make the emperor totally lose his mind. And so the nice guy was already showing him the jewelry that would be perfect for a princess. His eyes landed on a gorgeous sparkly ring. The guy then showed off a super decked out necklace, saying it was the most valuable thing they had. All of a sudden, Tofu just darted at him, snatching the necklace from the surprised guy's hands with his mouth. The jewelry hit the floor with a loud clang, and little pieces of the stone scattered everywhere. Realizing all the jewelry was fake, he scoffed and asked, all threatening like how he dared to sell him a knockoff. The guy tried to make excuses, totally scared, but the girl just waved over the security guards to escort him out. If a princess rolled up to a party wearing fake jewelry, the noble ladies would spot it immediately. Maybe this dude was hired by someone who wanted to put him in a super awkward situation. They had to find the person who planned this whole thing. He coldly ordered them to get rid of everything the guy brought, and to make sure the guy's tongue got a little trim so he could never scam anyone again. Crying in horror, the man yelled that he only did what the Count of Severn told him to do. He kept going on about how this man was part of the highest noble clique, so there was nothing he could do. Turns out the noble squad had her in their sights. After ordering the guy to be taken to jail, the girl gave Tofu a satisfied pat, praising him for being so clever. Still, the girl wondered how Tofu knew right away that the jewelry was fake. She stared at his face like really closely. Grabbing the dog by his cheeks, he yelled in amazement, "Wait, could my dog actually be a genius?" The next morning. So he woke up like way earlier than normal, and his stomach was screaming for food when his hand hit something soft. He whipped his head around and totally freaked, cause there was that same creep right next to him just snoozing away. Her scream totally jolted the guy awake, and he just stared at her like completely dazed while she super calmly asked him if he was a prince. The princess was like, "Hey, stick around and talk." But the dude wasn't having any of it. He threw the window open, hopped on the ledge like it was nothing, and just leapt down. The girl totally shook, ran over to the window. But dude, no one was down there. She was super confused and still trying to figure it out at breakfast. Larry was like, "What's up with that creep?" And she just casually replied, "Oh, just my husband, I guess." The maid totally gasped when she heard that. Meanwhile, she's just there chewing and thinking about how it's like totally normal for a married couple to share a bed. But then he just shows up out of nowhere and dips without even saying a word. Then it hits her he's not just some monster who turns into a human at night, but he also can't talk. Still, it was kind of weird. Why the prince was secretly watching her sleep. Larry just laughed and was like, "Maybe he's into you." But she was like, "Nah." 'Cause like they only saw each other at the wedding. The maid got all dreamy-eyed and was like, "Maybe he watched you from a distance and saw how awesome you are. And that's why he snuck into your bed." Choking on her food, she shot down Larry's theory, saying she honestly didn't care what her husband looked like. Anyway, that kind of thing only happens in like fantasy romance stories. For real, she didn't care what he looked like. She just wished he'd stop hiding and show himself already. Like without being all sneaky about it. Then out of nowhere, Tofu just jumps right on her. He gets comfy in his usual spot on her lap and gives her this super sad look with his big, watery, teary-looking eyes. She gets all worried and asks why he's crying. She figured he was scared her husband would hate him. She holds him close and tells Tofu that he's the cutest thing on the planet and her husband won't judge him for how he looks. Time like totally flew by. And just like that, summer faded into fall. Unlike all the drama in the book, her life was actually super chill and peaceful. and you could totally tell she was way happier. She was just chilling on a soft blanket under these colorful trees. The girl asked Laurie if she was still getting a ton of invites from all those noble ladies. She just sighed and nodded. She said the storage room was so packed there was literally no more room. Lost in her thoughts. She thinks that if they're gonna be this extra about sending invites, maybe she should just show up to one of them, you know. Then all of a sudden she asks when the prince's birthday is. Larry thinks for a sec and goes, "It's tomorrow." She was totally bugging about how fast time went by. So the next day, Madame Naria lets her know the princess's outfits are ready. Calling over the maid, the woman shows her 3 gorgeous dresses. Then she hands her this box and says it's got the pants she asked her to make. The girl happily pulls out a plaid jumpsuit and is totally admiring it. Naria, proud of her work, asks what kind of guy she's giving this gift to. But he totally throws her for a loop, saying he's gonna wear it himself. Naria nervously points out, like, that's not a dress. The girl just puts a hand on her shoulder, super chill, and tells her not to worry since she's way more into comfy clothes than pretty dresses. She just casually waltzes into the dressing room while the lady is stressing out, realizing they could get in major trouble. Cause if the princess wears guys' clothes, her highness will become a total laughingstock and Madame Naria's rep will be completely trashed. She had to stop her no matter what, and started her whole protest speech. But then the princess pulled back the curtains, revealing herself in a new fit that looked insanely good on her. Madame Naria literally gasped, just admiring how stunning Laurie looked. She squealed with joy, and Tofu yapped happily right back at her. Pleased with the compliment, he says, in that case he's wearing that exact outfit. But the woman objects, explaining that in the Empire there's a super strict line between women's and men's clothes, so this could cause some serious drama. He just calmly replies that traditions are cool and all. For sure, but if you just follow them, life gets way less interesting, especially since all that stuff is so outdated now. Thinking back to her home in Korea, she says that this kind of comfy clothing is gonna blow up one day. Madame Naria looks at her with total respect, apologizing for jumping to conclusions so fast. Soon they get Tofu all dressed up and he whines at the new feeling just out of habit. He's just melting over how cute his dog is. The girl didn't even care if she got yelled at, she was still gonna bring her beloved Tofu to the party. The day of the banquet finally came, and the princess walked into the hall in her new outfit, with her dog strutting majestically by her side. Everyone started buzzing about her, shocked, noticing that even though the clothes she was wearing were kinda weird, she was still rocking them. He stood completely still in front of the throne where the emperor was sitting. She gave a respectful bow, and the emperor thanked her for accepting the invite. The girl gives a polite smile, but in her head she's totally cackling, because he hasn't even seen the massive bill he had to pay just for her to show up. Getting up from the throne, the emperor loudly announces the start of the banquet. Glasses full of wine were raised, and you could hear the sound of them clinking. And the whole crowd gave a huge congratulations to the second prince for his birthday. She noticed, totally annoyed, that the guest of honor wasn't even there, which was like the entire point of this party. Suddenly someone came up to her and asked in a super suck-up tone if it was true she was the daughter of the Duke of Sajad. Turning around totally grossed out, she sees this girl in front of her who introduces herself as Robidin Sidel, daughter of the Marquis of Ren. She just turned away completely unbothered. Robidin let out a nasty little laugh, saying that Sajad was way smaller than Ren, so the Marquis of Ren was a higher rank than the Duke of Sajad. The girl literally choked on her wine at the nerve of it. She just smiled and pointed out that she's the Princess of Ren now, so it doesn't matter what her status was before she got married. Hiding her face with a fan, Robidin says sarcastically, that every princess is different. Seeing his total indifference, the girl scowled, claiming that she had no class and talked super harsh, just like you'd expect from someone from Sajad. She says back coldly that she has way more class than Levin herself, messing up the girl's name on purpose as expected. The princess totally loses it, mockingly asking them to get her situation since she's from Sajad. So it's tough for her to say his name right, messing it up again. Robidin just starts bawling, totally unable to take the bullying. Her friend runs over to help, smirking and saying she must just be super heartbroken. You know, cause she couldn't get any love from her husband. The princess noticed that neither of them were even married yet, which made Robin's friend ask nervously what the problem was. She just smiled and said it was a bummer to hear them say that, cause her own self-worth didn't depend on some dude's love. She sarcastically asked if they just liked hurting people to feel better about their own lives. And then she added with a grin that they needed to love themselves first. Robin got pissed and asked if she was trying to lecture them. Out of nowhere, a guy appeared behind Robin, breaking up their argument. The friends turned around and bowed, looking totally scared. It was the first Prince Reinhard. Ren smoothly asked if he could have a private word with the princess, and the girls immediately dipped. The prince gave this sketchy smile, asking if she was his brother's wife. The princess said yeah, but Tofu let out a warning growl and he just ignored the dog. Reinhard introduced himself as the crown prince, taking the girl's hand. She gave him an awkward smile back. She was thinking that probably wasn't gonna happen though. According to the book, the emperor never actually managed to pull off the whole ceremony to pass on the crown prince title before he died. Reinhard said, trying to flatter her, that for the good of the empire she had to marry a monster. He got closer and put a hand on her shoulder. He whispered in her ear that she should find him when she needed him, and that he wouldn't do her dirty. Tofu went off again, growling like he meant business. He lunged at the prince, sinking his fangs deep into his leg and biting down on the soft flesh. The guy collapsed on the ground with a groan, grabbing his injured leg. The guards rushed over in a flash. The prince started screaming his head off at them, yelling to kill the crazy dog immediately. She hugged Tofu tight, totally horrified. She yelled at them not to touch him. The guards surrounded the girl, not daring to lay a hand on her, while the furious Reinhard kept screaming at them to kill the dog. The emperor walked up and shut him down, pointing out that today was too good of a day for all that. The prince tried to argue, showing his dad the wound. Then, with a smirk, he asked if there'd been a single happy day since that monster was born, throwing shade at the second prince. His dad gave him an ice-cold look. He ordered him to stop being so rude. Reinhard tried and failed to get away from the guards who were trying to drag him off. The emperor turned to look at her, and she just gave him an awkward look back, hoping he'd show some mercy. But he gave a harsh order to throw the dog that dared to bite a royal in jail, with pure desperation in her eyes. She tried to stick up for Tofu, yelling that he didn't do it on purpose. She called out Tofu's name in pain, as he was getting locked in the tiny cage, and he barked back sadly. The princess threw herself at the emperor's feet, crying her eyes out. She begged him not to do that to Tofu, since Reinhard was the one who started saying nasty things to her, and Tofu was just defending her. But the emperor wouldn't budge. He said grimly that everyone deserves to live. The emperor just gave her a stone-cold look. Without even hearing her out, he just dipped and ordered her back to the palace, adding as a final burn that he wasn't going to take out the dog. 'Cause this dog was special. Broken was like totally clueless about what the emperor meant by the dog being special. She tried so hard to figure out what he was getting at, but nope. A few days had passed since the princess got back to the palace, and all she wanted to do was just flop on her bed and stare at the ceiling. Not even Laurie, who brought her food, could get her to cheer up. She just blankly told her to leave the food and bounce. The maid was also super worried about the whole situation. She stared out the window all sad, thinking about Tofu. Like, for real, there was something kind of sus about him. Plus, in the book, anyone who messed with the imperial family got their head chopped off. And His Majesty said he wouldn't kill the dog because he was special. Tofu was wicked smart. He was also a super picky eater, which gave off this vibe like he'd been ditched by some rich family or something. And on top of that, the emperor then ordered Madame Neria to just go along with the princess's demands about clothes for the dog. All this weirdness pointed to one single theory: the prince wasn't a monster. He was Tofu. She literally jumped out of bed, shook by her own idea. She excitedly called for Laurie and asked her what the second prince's name was. The maid, totally surprised, said his name was Schwart. Ren then asked if she could find out who was with the prince the day he got cursed. Later, after getting all the deets, Laurie reported that everyone who was with him that day was already dead. Just a handful of nobles and servants were allowed at that banquet. Word is only the emperor, his wife, and Schwart himself were still alive. The head maid told her this. But this info was super top secret, so Laurie was supposed to keep it on the down low. She thought about how carefully everything was planned. Suddenly a thought hit her, and the girl asked if she could ask the head maid for a list of the nobles who were there. Laurie answered, looking all guilty that from what she could tell, the head maid didn't even want to hear about it. She felt so let down, realizing that even though it was going to be risky, she'd have to figure it out herself. If things go down like in the book, a war is definitely going to break out here, and if Tofu is really a prince, then things are just going to get way more complicated. Schwert was a royal after all. He couldn't just ghost his people. The princess wouldn't be able to just leave Tofu on the battlefield. So if Tofu was a prince, then she couldn't stay out of the war, which meant they had to stop it somehow. But first things first. She needed to find out if the list of nobles who were there that day was even still around. Only then could she figure out the next steps of her plan. She'd managed to snag a pass to the records warehouse, and now she was hiding all tense behind the shelves, wondering how she was ever going to find what she needed in a place this huge. Suddenly someone called her from behind. When she spun around, she saw a servant in front of her, asking what brought her here. The girl answered, all nervously, that she just needed to check on something. The servant, bowing his head respectfully, told her she couldn't be in there, unless she was like a third-level official. The girl quickly started talking, saying she liked how the place was, knowing it was being guarded, and that he was supposed to bounce if he failed. But nah, he wasn't about to give up. So he decided to slide back that night. Then out of nowhere, he bumps into a maid in the hall who tells him that Tofu is back. He bursts into the room, screaming the dog's name at the top of his lungs. His eyes land on this poor dog, all beat up with tears in his eyes. The girl grabs Tofu in a hug and asks with a shaky voice, "How could this even happen?" The dog, super loyal, licks her hand, and the princess just can't stop the waterworks. She was so glad he was saved, but she couldn't wrap her head around how someone could not leave a single spot untouched on his tiny little body. A totally freaked out Larry ran after the doctor. He lays Tofu on his side, checking out the wounds, super worried. The blood just wouldn't stop flowing in these bright red drops from a deep gash. A second later, Larry and the doctor burst into the room. The girl realizes that Larry had to lie, telling him the princess was sick. 'Cause no doctor would ever come to treat a dog. She sadly pointed at Tofu and said it wasn't her who was sick, but the dog. The doctor, totally confused, asks again, but the girl just blows him off and asks if he can even fix him. He shakes his head and is all like, "I treat people, not dogs." She gets furious and snaps that he's no real doctor, then angrily ordering him to leave. The palace immediately. The doctor argues back like they can't just kick him out because he refused to treat the dog. He says that literally any doctor would have done the same thing. The princess just coldly says she needs a doctor who actually lives, not one who just stands around doing nothing. Totally ignoring his complaints, she tells Larry to get him out of there. She asks the maid to put the word out saying she urgently needs a doctor who can save any life, including a dog's, and that money is no object. Then she grabs some medicine from the dresser, wondering if she can even give it to the dog, since it's made for humans. Deciding it was worth a shot, she poured the stuff into a little dish. Pushing the dish toward Tofu, the girl asks him to try and drink the potion. He, fighting through the pain of his wounds, gets up and starts to lap up the healing liquid. Then he laid back down, and as she gently petted him, she wondered if she could just straight up ask him if he was her husband. She was more than happy with Tofu, just being a dog, but if he turned out to be human, she'd be cool with that too. After all, she loved him for him. She watched the sleeping dog super closely until night fell, and the room went pitch black with only the faint moonlight shining in. Tofu's appearance started to change, morphing into human features. It turned out he was actually human, just like she thought. Maybe. Schwartz didn't know his secret was out, which meant she'd have to wait until he told her himself. Gently touching his head, the girl whispered that he just really didn't want to die. The next morning, she sleepily rubbed her eyes as she sat up in bed. Tofu woke up and gave her a totally bewildered look. The girl cheerfully asked if he slept okay, pretending she was clueless about everything. He nervously shook his head, not understanding how he even got there. The princess, watching him with a smile, thought about how wild it was that he actually turned into a dog every single morning. She told Tofu that she had just woken up too. She opened her arms for a hug and called him over softly, and Tofu totally zoomed over to her, clinging to his person. A few days went by and she was super careful bandaging up the pup. She was so stoked to see he was pretty much all better. Then out of nowhere, Larry busts into the room freaking out and drops this massive stack of letters explaining they were all invites from nobles. The princess got all awkward, realizing she totally made a scene at the second prince's birthday bash, and now they were spamming her with invites again. Larry said that for whatever reason, some wild rumors were starting to fly, like the real reason His Majesty didn't off the dog. You know, the one that attacked the royal fam was because the princess is totally the emperor's favorite. Plus, everyone was gossiping about her fit. It looked like this kind of outfit was about to become a whole trend now. Anyway, she had zero plans of hitting up any of those parties, so she just told Larry to deal with the invites like always. Then all of a sudden, Tofu starts growling like he means business. The girl whipped around to look at him, totally shocked, as he stared hard at the window where a shadow was hiding behind the curtains. The dog started barking its head off, completely bugging out. She yanked open the curtains and found this fluffy cat just chilling there. It was just sitting on the windowsill. Tofu kept going ballistic, but the girl wasn't even paying attention to him. She was just like, OMG, it's so cute. The dog literally stopped dead in his tracks and gave her this look of total shock as she kept gushing and calling to the cat. The cat totally swatted her hand away with its paw, but she was still obsessed, thinking even its sassy attitude was adorable. The princess, waving her hands all excitedly, asked Larry if people here hated on cats too, and the maid, just sighing, was like, yep, and there's nothing you can do about it. Tofu watched the whole thing, looking so betrayed, while Larry was just cracking up. He said it looked like the dog was getting jelly. Tofu just shot her a dirty look and turned away, trying to act all high and mighty. She just laughed, kneeling down in front of the dog, and promised him he was for real way cuter than the cat. One rainy night, the girl decided that now that she knew the tea that Tofu was actually the second prince, she couldn't just let him live his life like this. She had to spill the truth, but in a way that wouldn't mess things up for Schwartz at all. And there was only one way to pull it off. She and her crew pulled up to this totally busted-looking house. A dim light was burning inside. This was the building for the most legit info guild, and inside a dude with a scar on his face met them. She told him she needed to find someone, and with a totally bored look on his face, he was like, "So who you looking for?" One of her guys immediately shoved a sword up to his throat, getting all threatening. He was like, "You're in the presence of a noble lady, you better show some respect." But she cut him off, signaling that it was cool. She said she was looking for a commoner, a girl who used to be the second prince's nanny at the imperial palace. She went on saying the nanny got framed for something and kicked out and she needed him to find her. The guy frowned and was like, "Hold up, we're not talking about just some random commoner here. This is the prince's nanny, so the price for this is gonna be steep." The girl then hands him a bag and is basically like, "I'll give you whatever cash you want," seeing his payday. So she and Tofu rolled up into this tavern, and this smiley waitress came over, but then she peeped that the girl wasn't alone. The waitress was like, "Yo, no dogs allowed in here." The princess explained she was just gonna place her order and wait out on the patio. But the waitress hit her with a, "Nah, can't do that either." So the girl asked a totally fair question like, "Why not? The patio isn't even inside." Right away, everyone sitting around started whispering and she just let out this massive sigh. She knew some weird rumors were gonna start flying around again, but honestly, it was probably for the best. 'Cause now she could blow up her rep so much that literally no one would even dare send her an invite. Finally chilling onto the patio, the girl orders up 2 of the bougiest cakes and 2 black teas, and one of them was for Tofu. So it had to cool down first. Everyone around was shook when they heard how crazy expensive it all was. Like regular people couldn't even dream about stuff that pricey. She just calmly said she'd pay 10 times more and that she'd cover everyone else's tab too. So if anyone had a problem with it, they could just say something to her face. The waitress got all flustered and rushed off to get the order. Then all of a sudden this sarcastic voice comes from behind her. She turns around and sees Robodin with her crew and they start talking mad trash, saying she was totally stoked to see them again. He remembered like, oh snap, that's the rude chick from the banquet. Robodin, trying to sweet-talk her, asked if she even remembered him. And the girl clapped back instantly, saying she doesn't remember people who aren't important to her. Robodin was totally thrown and pissed. She started making fun of the girl again, just dragging her name through the mud. And Robodin just pouted, totally fuming inside. Then all of a sudden she noticed the princess's dog was scarfing down the cake. She snarked that the whole dog lover thing really suited her. But the princess didn't even catch the shade. She just smiled and said she'd totally recommend getting a puppy. Robodin scoffed and was like she had zero interest in raising some useless animal. Taking a sip of her fancy tea, the princess calmly called her out, saying that judging someone's life by how useful they are is messed up. She went on saying she gets the vibe that Robodin would totally ditch people from her crew the second they weren't useful anymore. Robodin was shook by the sudden topic change. The princess just said she was only speaking her mind. And anyway, she believed that no one's life is like inherently useless. The other guests around them started whispering and giving dirty looks. Glancing over at the Marquis's daughter, she said with a smirk that actually back when she lived in the kingdom, she had a super nasty attitude. But after she met Tofu, she chilled out a lot. A confused Robodin asked her again what she meant by chilled out. And the girl answered that she'd been in a really dark place that nobody could help her with. But then she got better. One of Robodin's friends kinda awkwardly raised her hand and asked if it was true that dogs can help with your feelings. The princess just nodded with this huge bright smile. Later that night, the girl was trying super hard to fall asleep, but it just wasn't happening. She was dying to know what Schwartz was up to right then. So she got out of bed. She wrapped a shawl around herself and realized she just had to see him in the moonlight. The prince was just sitting there on the ground. He was leaning against this huge tree just staring at the shiny water. She was totally out of breath from running and stopped close by. When he heard footsteps, Schwartz spun around all confused, his whole body tensed up, and then the prince just started running. But the girl's super clear voice stopped him cold. He did this whole formal bow thing and she gently said she wanted to get closer. After hearing her out, he just turned around and started to dip. But she wasn't about to give up that easy. She desperately grabbed his hand. Schwartz spoke to her for the first time, saying if they hung out, the curse would spread. Smiling, the girl was like, "So why'd you get married then?" She apologized for grabbing his hand and asked him not to run off again if he was cool with talking. The guy let out a heavy sigh, totally defeated. She sat down on the grass near him and things were quiet for a few seconds. The girl spoke first, asking if it was cool to call him Mr. Schwartz, and he said yeah. She said he could call her Ella or whatever, she didn't care. Then she brought up that she'd heard the prince had a nanny once. And she asked if he was interested in how she was doing. Shrek in this totally flat voice just said no. She was not expecting that at all. So in total shock, she asked if he for real didn't want to know about her. The prince just sounded super down. He said it was better if he didn't get involved with anyone. Just knowing the nanny was okay was enough, so there was no need to go looking for her. She was kinda bummed thinking how the nanny was the only one who stuck with Schwartz till the end, and he'd definitely want to see her. The girl carefully told him that she'd actually already put in a request with the Information Guild, and if she found out her address, she would for sure let him know. The prince tried to say no, but she insisted he might change his mind. Schwartz went dead silent and just stared at the ground looking sad. The sun started to rise slowly, lighting up the land with its first rays. The girl stood up, noticing how much time had passed. Turning back to the prince, she asked if it was time for her to bounce. Shrek said quietly that he hadn't actually talked to anyone in forever, so it was pretty hard for him. She totally got it and said that if he talked with her more often, then he might get used to it. Blushing a little, the prince asked her, real carefully, if she would come see him more often. With a huge smile, the girl said she'd come whenever he wanted. The prince shot back that it was dangerous. When the princess asked what he meant, the guy just clammed up again. The girl realized it was tough to get the prince to open up, which was wild, since in his dog form he barked at literally anything. Finally, Shrek spoke up sadly, saying that if she did that, he'd get way too attached to her, and if you get attached to someone, sooner or later that person will just leave you. She remembered when she first found out she was a character in a book. She had a super hard time because everything from her old world was just gone, and everything here was so unfamiliar. But then she had Laurie and Tofu, who became her world, and she was also terrified of losing them. So she understood what Shrek was saying better than anyone. That's why the girl said with total confidence that there was no point in him worrying about ending up alone someday. Besides, she could make sure she'd never ghost him. She said it with a wink. The princess announced she wasn't about to leave the guy by himself. Gently squeezing his hands, she declared she'd try to get him used to her. Then she asked him not to be afraid of getting used to her, and in that moment, for the first time in a long time, Schwartz gave a real smile. They kept holding hands under the warm rays of the sun. The rising sun was like warming me up inside and out. He woke up super late because he'd spent the whole night with Schwartz. You could tell he was totally beat because he was just passed out, cold next to me in his dog form. Laurie came in and was all like, "OMG, are you sick?" Because the maid tried to wake me up, but I was dead to the world. I just awkwardly said I was crazy tired. Laurie told me a letter came from the Information Guild, and the second I said that, Tofu immediately jumped up and trotted over, peeking at the letter with a little smile. I realized Schwartz was still dying to get the tea on his nanny. I started to open the letter, and the little pup tilted his head super into it. Inside it said that Romani, who was 36, had died in a carriage accident right after leaving the palace. The second I read it, Tofu just crumpled. He was just staring into nothing, looking so heartbroken. Laurie got all excited asking what was in the letter, and I just nervously swallowed. My stomach was in like a million knots. All of a sudden, Tofu bolted, and the maid called after him, totally confused, but he blew her off. She suggested maybe he was sick, and I just hopped out of bed and was like, "I'm gonna go find him." The nanny meant everything to the prince, and I knew he had to be feeling an insane amount of pain. I found Tofu in this secluded, quiet spot, just zoned out staring at this rainbow fountain. I sat down next to him super gently and told him I'd stay right there with him. It's never easy losing someone for real, and I was thinking maybe the nanny's death was one of those sketchy covered-up murder deals. After the prince got cursed, Schwartz has to be the one who knows what really went down. Tears started streaming from the poor puppy's eyes. I felt so bad and begged him not to cry. I scooped him up into my arms and offered to tell him a story to get his mind off things. I put Tofu on my lap and started telling him all about Snow White. I just kept talking in this super chill, calming voice, until the little guy finally conked out. I gave him a big squeeze and then I basically passed out too. I woke up way later when the sun was long gone and the sky was this deep, dark blue, and Tofu wasn't there. Then it hit me. OMG, I was supposed to meet Schwartz tonight. I started booking it as fast as I could, to our meeting spot. The prince was already there in his usual spot, just kind of looking off into the distance. He turned to me and gave me a little smile. He noticed I was totally winded and was like surprised. "Whoa, did you run all the way here?" And I was like, "Yeah, I thought you'd be waiting on me." And I just grabbed his hand and squeezed it tight. Schwartz's cheeks instantly turned bright red when I touched him. Seeing that I got worried and was like, "What's wrong?" He just pointed at his hand, all embarrassed. I yanked my hand back super fast and apologized like, "Oh, my bad, I totally spaced." I was thinking about how when he's Tofu, he doesn't mind being touched at all. It's like I probably need to touch him more often so he gets used to it. So then out of nowhere, I just commanded paw, and he totally did it. He completely forgot he wasn't in Tofu mode. When he realized what he did, he just froze and stared down at his own hand, totally shook. I started cracking up seeing how obedient he was. He was just so flustered and red. He tried to pull his hand back and looked away, but I caught it and was like, "We can just hold hands for today if you want." Shrek's totally beat red, but he's down. The girl decides they need to talk about something good for his own sake. The prince suddenly asks her to tell that old story. You know, the one the girl in the tofu costume told him, then he just stops cold. The dude immediately tries to cover making up some story about how he accidentally overheard them. As they were walking by, the girl was low-key laughing to herself at how cute he was trying to explain it all. She brushes his hair and asks what part he heard. He answers, then keeps the story going, pulling the prince deep into this fairy tale vibe. They're just lying there on the moonlit ground talking, and all of a sudden he asks why the prince doesn't call her by her name. Schwartz gets all shy and explains that he feels like if he says her name, there's no going back. 'Cause then he'll just want to say it over and over. He ends with, "I'll say it when I'm ready," and the girl is totally shook. She's thinking that what he's saying is way more intense than just saying her name. All of a sudden, she shoots up surprised. It hits her that she doesn't want to hide anything from this guy. Shirt stands up after her looking surprised. She works up the nerve and admits she isn't really the one. ELA. It's a little awkward, but bit by bit the girl thought they could actually get closer. But with all the secrets, it was way harder. The more Shirt lies, the harder it's gonna be to talk, and even harder to come up with excuses. And for real, she didn't want to keep secrets from a guy so handsome and sweet, so clenching her fists, she decided to spill the tea and quietly asked him to call her by her real name next time. The prince, totally lost, asked her again what she meant. The girl awkwardly tried to explain that this body actually belongs to ELA, and that the whole thing is super complicated. She asked him straight up if he believed in souls getting reincarnated. 'Cause like she was actually from a whole different world. But she just woke up here one day in this world and in a different body. The girl was deadass hoping Schwartz would believe her. The prince then asked where her real body was. But honestly, she had no clue if it was even still alive back in her world or not. She never really let herself think about it, and for real, there was a chance that even though she got hit by a truck going super fast, she might still be alive. But if she wasn't, her parents were probably having a really hard time accepting their daughter was gone. Suddenly, Shrek asked her if she could ever go back to her world. She gave him this longing look, and he said she probably didn't know the answer to that either. She was like, for real. At first, I was in total denial. I got super depressed and just wanted it to be over. But weirdly enough, I started getting used to all this. I had Laurie, who became so much more to me than just a maid, and Tofu, who brought so much joy into my life. and now counting Shirt, I had 3 people who meant the world to me. That's why I didn't want to lose this world so easily. Shirt gently touched her and asked if it would be messed up of him to ask her not to go anywhere. Looking radiant, she grabbed his hand, totally stunned, and asked if that meant he believed her. The prince said yes, since she's the one who said it. He admitted that at first he was caught off guard, because she just walked up to him without hesitating, even when she called him a monster. And then he got scared because he thought she's such a kind person. He'd just ditch her somewhere. Like for real, after she grabbed his hand, he started having these messed up nightmares that she was gonna ghost him. His eyes went wide, like totally shook. Blown away by what Prince Schwart was thinking, she like squeezed his hand even tighter. And he just spilled, saying he didn't even care if she was some rando from another dimension. He just needed her to swear she wouldn't dip on him. For him, that was literally the only thing that mattered. With this sweet smile, she promised him she wasn't gonna just bounce like that. Shirt asked her what her name was before she landed in this world. The girl was all smiles and was like, "My last name's Sun and my first name's Irina." Shirt said her name again, kinda tasting the sound of it. "Irina," she squealed, totally happy, and snuggled her cheek into his hand. Irina confessed that, like, talking to him made her feel way better, because literally no one knew about any of this before. So from then on, she felt like she could be totally real with him too. But after she said that, Shirt just stopped dead and called out to her. Then he whispered like he was about to drop a bomb, that he actually had something he couldn't talk about. Irina figured he'd spill the tea later, but she never thought it would be today. The prince was obviously bugging out, totally unable to get out what he wanted to say. The dude grabbed his head and started shaking a little. Irina instantly ran over and sat next to him, trying to chill Schwart out. She gave him a sweet hug, realizing that since he'd been so cut off from everyone, for so long it was crazy hard for him to open up. She assured him that it was totally fine if he couldn't talk about it, and he could just tell her when he was ready. The prince hyped himself up, and lifted his head about to spill everything. But of course they got interrupted by someone yelling, like nonstop for that princess. Schwart jumped up super fast, threw out a quick "see you later," and just vanished into the super thick bushes. Irina watched him go all sad, just as a crying Larry came running up to her. The maid couldn't find her in her room and started totally freaking out. Irina kinda shocked by how extra Larry was being. He was like, "My bad," and said they should probably dip, taking one last look at the bushes where Schwartz had totally ghosted. She wondered if she'd ever actually get to hear the real story. So the first thing Irina sees when she wakes up the next morning is Tofu's face staring at her all bummed out. She gives the dog a big happy hug and tells him it's so good to see him this morning. Then she suddenly noticed Tofu's heart was like pounding super fast and wondered if he was stressed out. Yeah, his heart was just hammering for some reason. She got all nervous and was like, "I'll just go tell Larry it's time for breakfast." So Irina went out into the hall and called for Larry. But instead she bumps into this other maid. The maid is all hyped up, announcing that Mr. Reynard is here. They tried to get him to chill, but he just kept demanding they give him the dog. Irina was so annoyed, thinking Reynard was a total psycho, and decided to go deal with him herself. She took Tofu back to the room, put him on the bed, and told him to just wait there for her. The dog let out this sad little whine like he didn't want her to go alone, but Irina told him it was way too dangerous, and that he had to stay put. After she left the room, she ordered the maid to go tell the Emperor what was going down like ASAP. She was positive that since the Emperor knew Tofu was actually Shrek, he would totally come and save the day. As she walked on, she suddenly ran right into Reinhard, who was totally messing with poor Larry, who was just taking the hits from the first prince, got all teary-eyed but kept her mouth shut. Irene rushed over to her, but Reinhard totally blocked her, giving the princess a smirk and calling her trash. He got all up in her face and asked where she'd stashed that little mutt, meaning Tofu. Irene, not even flinching at the prince's vibe, just gave him a seriously annoyed look. She just kept walking straight up, ignoring Reinhard, and went over to one of the servants, who looked at her all nervous with no clue what was coming. She whipped her leg around and slammed it down hard on the servant's leg, digging her heel right into his skin. The dude screamed and doubled over in pain. Irene, totally ticked off, was like, "How dare you guys come in here and make such a racket?" She kept going, turning to the servant and asking if his boss was happy with his little tantrums. Shouldn't he as his boy be trying to stop him? A furious Reinhard tried to get her attention, but Irene instantly swatted his hand off her shoulder, asking him with a total death glare if she'd said something wrong. The prince was shook, cussed under his breath, and then was like, he thought since the Emperor was so chill with her, he'd just follow his lead. The princess snapped back, telling him not to even go there, and pointed out that cussing was so not classy. He asked her again, totally shocked. Maybe other people would put up with the prince's trash talk, but Irene was not about that life, so she straight up said that he heard her 100% right. Pissed that she was being so casual, Reinhard totally roared, but the princess just calmly clapped back, saying that even if he's a prince, he should know the basic rules of manners. But apparently, Reinhard didn't even get the basics. The prince screamed his head off, making Irene cover her ears with a totally unbothered look. Then she sarcastically said it was cool if he didn't know, cause he could always learn. And to top it off, she mockingly called him a loser. Reinhard finally snapped and screamed, asking what made her so dang confident to think she could act like that. Irene just calmly pointed behind him and said the answer was right over there. The prince turned around, totally stunned. Behind him were the Imperial Knights led by Yuden. The Chamberlain gave a polite little bow, greeting both of them. He said that on His Majesty's orders, he was there to pick up the first Prince Reinhard. The knights grabbed the prince by the arms to drag him away, but he was freaking out and tried to fight them off. In the end, he blurted out that he would totally get even with that punk. Not even scared of his threats, she just casually flipped him the bird. When they finally dragged the prince away, the princess let out a tired sigh. She went over to Larry all concerned, asking if she was okay. Larry happily said that she and the other maid were fine. Yuden apologized for all the drama, and said the Emperor would make sure the first prince wouldn't be bothering her again. Irene, hugging Larry, was like, I hope so. But for real, she didn't believe it one bit, seeing how much hate was in Reinhard's eyes. It was hard to believe he'd just leave them alone. Going into the room, Irene let the girl go first, and said they needed to get her checked out. Suddenly, both of their eyes went wide with horror. Bright red blood was pouring from Tofu's paw, staining the whole carpet. Irene instantly forgot about all her other problems, cause right now the only thing she cared about was the dog. Looks like he tried to open the door with his paw and got hurt trying. Laurie immediately bolted to go get the first aid stuff. Irene's eyes were all teary as she gently took Tofu's paw, sadly calling him a silly boy. She warned me it was gonna hurt and told me to just hang in there. Tofu hung his head, looking totally bummed, and let out a little whimper. Irina wrapped up his paw and also dabbed some healing potion on Larry's wounds. After all that, she just flopped down at the table looking wiped. Tofu whined, looking all guilty at her. The second she turned around, the dog just bolted right into her arms. That actually made Irina crack a smile. She explained she didn't go with him because she was scared something would go wrong. And if the same thing happened again, she'd do the exact same thing. Tofu just shook his head like, no way, and barked like he was totally ticked off. The princess threatened him, saying if he pulled another reckless stunt, she'd give him a bath herself. She'd pat his back and smooch him 500 times. The dog totally froze on the spot, and Irina could tell, all satisfied, that he totally got in the message. Meanwhile, the first Prince Reinhard was drinking to get over his L. He was trashing everything around him, wondering with disgust what the heck the Emperor was thinking siding with the princess and her dog. Right before this, he'd yelled at his dad, demanding to know why he was so overprotective of the second princess. With a nasty smirk, he hinted that maybe she was his side piece. The Emperor immediately laid him out with a huge slap. He declared that Reinhard would get what was coming to him once he sobered up. Reinhard was convinced the Emperor and the princess were plotting something, and there was a solid chance it had something to do with luck. Ever since they were kids, the first prince was always compared to his brother, even after he turned into a monster. He had a wife who straight up ignored Reinhard. After cracking open a new bottle, the first prince decided he's gonna find out what the deal is with those two. Wasted, he called for the butler, who came running right away, turning to the prince looking super worried. And he orders him to get the Marquis of Tenero on the line, like right now. Just then, 2 head knights from the 2nd and 4th Imperial Knight regiments showed up to see the princess, wanting to guarantee she had better protection. Irina gave them a polite hello, smiling and saying she trusted them. A second-in-command was going to be her direct escort. The more experienced 4th Regiment took over full protection of the palace. Of course, it was also possible to keep tabs on Larry's closest allies through him, since in the fantasy world, the main characters usually get screwed over the most by their inner circle. During dinner, Irina asked the second-in-command if he could walk with her that night. She explained that she actually sees Shrek every single night. Larry was totally shook, because the princess had never told her anything about this. She asked, all ticked off, if that meant that he'd met him the night she went missing. Erin just smiled and said it was true. She said sorry to Larry and scooped up Tofu. She warned that Schwart might get spooked if someone else was with her. Bowing his head, the knight promised that if that happened, he'd just escort her from a distance. Out of nowhere, Larry asked what the second prince was like, because the rumors said he was a terrible person. Irina promised that he's actually super kind and good, and sometimes even sweet. Tofu immediately grinned and barked happily. That night, the princess went to her usual spot where a blonde guy was waiting for her. Irina happily ran right to him. So he told her the breeze that day was totally perfect. While they were just vibing on the grass, the prince was like, just call me Shul, which was his nickname back when he was a little kid. She was totally stoked, pointing out how their names were like almost the same. Schwartz started blushing and kinda shyly said he was into it too. Right then, Irina remembered that the prince had something he wanted to tell her last time they hung out, so she reassured him that he could just tell her whenever he was ready, and said she was seriously so happy he was cool with her calling him by his nickname. After that, they just talked for like a super long time. Shul shyly threw it out there that if he seemed kinda quiet, that's not really who he is, which totally surprised Irina. But with this like super bright smile, she let him know that she totally got it.